I'm Samantha Eric alongside Brian Dunseth for this week's RSL preview, looking ahead to the Western Conference semifinals. RSL will travel to the Emerald City. Dunny took care of business at home. What did you see in this game that finally allowed RSL to beat Portland after Portland took the better of 4 regular season matches?
Yeah, a week ago, you and I were talking about this matchup. We were talking about Portland. We were talking about Real Salt Lake. We were talking about this organic rivalry. We were talking about this battle on the field, and a lot of the faces of the names, I think, in terms of quality, were very similar. But the difference has been being ruthless with your opportunities, and half opportunities here, missed opportunities there, and next thing you know, RSL found themselves trailing in both matches. I think what I saw at the weekend was an identity that RSL has had since the Gold Cup break, and something that you and I were talking about. It doesn't matter about whether it's hot, whether it's cold, if it's rain or if it's snow, if it's altitude or it's an artificial surface. There's something about this team that has kind of reset the mind of how defensively as a unit they want to play, how they want to keep the game in front of them, how they want to nullify kind of simplistic buildup. And I think what I was watching was a team with hunger and desire that was playing at Rio Tinto Stadium, that recognized that, and you and I talked about this, I wanted to see a cockiness, I wanted to see a swagger, I wanted to see an ownership of what home field advantage looks like. And I thought that's what we did. Now, were there mistakes? Yeah, there was mistakes on both sides, but that's inevitable when you're talking about a playoff format, and a win and you move on, a loss and you go home. But I wasn't sure what this format was going to look like, but I'll tell you what,
I loved
every
it.
single game left it all on the field. There was nothing in the back of your mind to say, it's okay, we have another game, or hey, let's manage this result because we have another game. It was exciting. You had rain, you had sleet, you had snow, you had tough tackling, you had jawing. It was a fantastic game. And by the way, Kyle Beckerman going like this before the ball even went across, like he saw it coming. And good on Jefferson for punishing that mistake.
It was the best half of soccer I had seen from RSL, that first 45 all year. It was everything you just said we wanted to see was out there on the field. Second half did look a little different, especially to get things going. Portland found that equalizer. Do you think it was more about the adjustments that Gio Savarese made with his group at the break, or more about things that RSL maybe wasn't doing as well as they were doing in the first?
Well, probably a little bit of both, but I think it's understandable because for Gio and the Timbers, the idea was, okay, we have to take more risks, and by taking more risks, we have to throw the numbers a little bit more forward. And if we're going to throw numbers a little bit forward, let's think about being less pragmatic with possession. Let's be a little bit more direct, and I think that's what we saw. It's always when you're talking about Portland, whether you're talking about Brian Fernandez in the lineup or not, whether you're talking about Diego Valeri in the lineup or not, when you have a Bobasi, you have Dairon Asprilla, you have Sebastian Blanco, there's always going to be this intelligence with athleticism that becomes the threat. And so I think for Gio, it was risk versus reward. The risk was we're going to throw numbers forward. The reward was he got the equalizer.
Well, in the end, it didn't matter what Portland did. Jefferson Savarino, late game winner, courtesy of Joao Plata with that cross that it looked like he got taken down by 4 players, somehow made it. Albert Rusnak with such an intelligent dummy to allow Sava to put that one past Steve Clark, get the win. I want to talk to you about the substitutions. Freddie with another double sub. Sam Johnson, Joao Plata coming in late. What can those two bring? Did you like? What have you seen from Plata, the substitution patterns that Freddie has been implementing later in the season?
I think what we're seeing is the ability, what I've called the deepest roster that the club has put together. Going back to the days of Dane and Craig and the way this roster had been built, and then the application of Mike, and now with Freddie. What you're seeing is an opportunity to really change the game. Now, whether you want to start, and this was the big question mark, right? You felt like defensively and in the midfield, you knew what the options were. But I think what kind of will upset any opponent, including Brian Smetzer and the Seattle Sounders, is they're not sure who to prepare for. Do you prepare for Damir Kreilach playing the fake kind of false nine? Do you play for Corey Baird that's just going to run his tail off and give you something a little bit different? Or do you start with Sam? And all three players play the role differently. And so do you want to go, shoulder to shoulder and bang and be post up and be direct through Dunny, which, by the way, he's got the technical ability and the late arriving in the box, which we see time and time again. Do you want to use Sam to kind of run the seams and get in behind and into the kind of the shadows off the shoulders of the center backs? Or do you want Corey to kind of be up there causing havoc and checking back and sprinting and spinning? And I think that's what's, I think first and foremost, that's been kind of the test for any opponent is who do I start as a .9? Yeah, because RSL, it's kind of weird. RSL, since the days of Sabo, have never really played with a .9. And what Sam brings is kind of that Robbie Finley-esque pace, but with more intelligence with his movements. He's more lethal with his finishing. So then you start thinking about the subs. Whatever this looks like from the start, what Freddie's realized and his staff, that you can make 2 changes and completely transform the way the team looks. And I think with bringing Plata on, Plata, it was late because of everything that happened during the summer, but he's starting to show kind of these glimpses of the Plata that was, 2019, 2016, 2017, where he's a constant threat. I think that ball was more hopeful than purposeful. And the dummy from Albert was super intelligent, and it sucked both defenders in, and give credit to Jefferson. But yeah, I think in terms of that substitution pattern, Freddie's got a bunch of different looks, and it's all dependent upon what the weakness is with the other team, how he views the strength of the team in terms of the form and the fitness of the players coming in, and then ultimately you can, if you want to go smash and grab, whether you want to go speed and athleticism, whether you want to lock the game down, he's got a bunch of different options.
You mentioned how Kyle knew before everybody
Yeah.
that goal was going in. But what I loved so much was the celebration right after, where you have Dunny running off from the bench. And I don't know if you caught it. It was my favorite part of the whole celebration with Ishmael.
Yeah, get off the field.
All of a
What are you
sudden,
doing? Get
took
off
him
the field.
a few seconds to realize Dunny should not be on the field.
Yeah, it was probably
And
the big black parka that indicated he should not be on the
It
field.
was amazing, but I just love how the group is coming together, and it feels like at the right time when they need that, because it is all about this team. I wouldn't say that we have a Zlatan on the roster. You need every single guy bought in.
You do, and we've talked about this for the last couple of weeks. I think the thing that's been most impressive to me is kind of the sanctity of the locker room, because you can't control all of this other stuff.
Right.
So what they've controlled is their performances day to day on the training field, and then on the field itself. And listen, has there been blips? Yeah, of course there's been blips, but I think that's in the midst of what could be ultimate havoc. Ultimate havoc. They've done a fantastic job of controlling the controllables.
And now they're on to the Western Conference semifinals, a trip to the number 2 seeded Seattle Sounders, who it took them a little bit longer in their first round playoff game to get the job done. Ended up a hat trick from Jordan Morris, but FC Dallas, a young team, gave everything they could to that game and really put up a fight. When you watched that game, what did you see as some of the weaknesses on Seattle? Because yes, they won, but there were some things that allowed this FC Dallas team to get back into that game and make them go into extra time that maybe RSL can exploit as well.
For me, I see an issue at center back. I see, without Chad Marshall, this team defensively doesn't feel the same. Stefan Frey is going to come up with save after save after save, you know that. But I look at, I don't want to say it's just a leadership and athleticism issue, because Chad was a presence, but he wasn't like a vocal leader, but he had a range and he had a size, and Chad was Chad. And now whether you're talking about Kim Keehee, you're talking about Arriaga, you're talking about Ramon Torres coming back after missing those 10 games for suspension, for me, there's just something a little bit off. And then, whether you're talking about Brad Smith or Nuhu Tolo, or you can plug and play, but I think the one thing, when I look at Seattle, there's indifference, mistakes, miscommunication at times, or there's kind of like this over the top aggressiveness. And I think what we saw in that game was a lot of frustration and over the top aggressiveness, which inevitably let them open up And I think that's one thing that Brian Schmetzer and his staff will be really frustrated about, was the manner in which they were conceding those
Yeah,
goals.
because they were up by 2 and then allowed Dallas back into
And Dallas took risks. I mean, if you're chasing the game, you can take those risks. And I give Lucci and his team a lot of credit for the development, because it's a completely different team than it was underneath Oscar Pereja, and it's a one for the future. And that's what I've said all season long. It's not this season. It's maybe 2 seasons from now, where if they continue to build in this manner, they're going to be they're going to have a really good foundation. But for Seattle, Jordan Morris is in fantastic form. There's no doubt about it. And when you have kind of the physical assets that they have and the difference makers with Rui Diaz and Ladero and Christian Roldan and all these guys, they've got a very, very good team. But when you concede 3 goals at home in a playoff format, that's when things should be super, super tight, as opposed to being as open as they were. So when I see that, if the game can open up, I think it's a benefit for them, but it's also a curse for them, if that makes sense. Because on the defensive side, they're exposed because the flanks get forward, and then do you have the ability to deal with the transition?
So the regular season, they split the games. RSL got the job done here most recently, beating them 3-0. But Seattle took the win just by 1 goal back at Century League. I think it was beginning of April.
Yeah.
So all to play for in this game. How do you like them matched up right now? I'd like you to keep in mind that Seattle game at Seattle, no Damir Kreilach. He was serving that red card suspension from the Dallas game prior.
Yeah.
How do they match up now at this point in the season? Because I think also when Seattle traveled to RSL, it wasn't their full roster.
Yeah, they were missing players too. They match up really well, actually. I think for RSL, again, it comes back to this conversation you and I were having earlier. For Freddie, he can throw a bunch of different looks. And do you want a Dami sitting in between whoever it may be, Kim Kihi, Arriaga, or Ramon Torres? Do you want them kind of sitting in between and battling, shouldering, getting the arms up, being a target? Or knowing that at times they're going to try to compress the game with the numbers that they have going forward, having that immediate threat over the top, or having kind of that inseam inverted run? Because I think this is going to be one of those games where Albert's going to have to be super influential. Like his pacing of the game, how he slows the game down and then he speeds the game up. That's going to be Jefferson checking back and having someone up his tailpipe every time he gets the ball. And then kind of the question marks of the midfield battle. I think with Everton Luis, and I with
I
all
loved
due
what you
respect,
said to him. I said about him on your counterattack last week.
I mean, he's a complete difference maker, and I mean this with all due respect to all the other players, but I think Everton is the biggest offseason acquisition in years for this team, because Albert, Dami, Jefferson, Sam, all these guys are fantastic, but there's an engine and a bite. Yes. And when you put he and Kyle together, they're almost the perfect tandem, because they find this kind of teeter-totter balance, and they're both aggressive, they're both antagonistic, they're both not afraid to start jawing. We know Kyle's going to jaw, and he's going to try to be an irritant. So yeah, this is going to be a really fun one, but it's the artificial surface. You start thinking about weather, you start thinking about the ball skipping around, and even in the manner in which Jordan Morris scored that game winner, the awkwardness of that surface leads to weird chances. And I think that's where defensively you have to find a way to be aggressively reacting, if that makes sense. You have to have your head on a swivel. You have to be so alert that not only kind of like touch tight in the box, but then kind of like what could possibly go wrong. That's what you have to think about if you're a defender.
So I wish we had DJ here, because he's
Oh boy.
Mr. Statman with our record on turf.
Okay.
I think we've done better, according to DJ, than past years on turf, but you'll have to reach out to him on Twitter, I guess. He'll maybe respond. We'll see. So as you mentioned, set pieces I want to talk about before we go. That was the way RSL conceded to Portland this past first round game. How much more important do they become in these type of knockout round games where you can work your butt off, work your tail off the entire game defending, being a unit, but then you can't concede in that manner.
It's the exact thing that we talked about last week, and my whole thing is we can talk about run of play, we can talk about matchups, we can talk about finding the correct balance, we can talk about the dominance in the midfield and what simple possession versus counter-attacking possession looks like. I think in games like this, corners, set pieces, redirects, knockdown balls, all of them become that much more important, and RSL learned the hard way. But again, and if you can score or generate dangerous chances off set pieces alone, corners, free kicks, any of that, sometimes that's the big difference. And how fluky have some of these goals been? I mean, how many deflections have we seen turn it, like, you know, Seattle or Portland? It's a weird time. Fluky stuff happens. So again, kind of this aggressively reacting to really dangerous situations is the key.
Last question for you. What are you watching for on Wednesday? What do you want to see from this RSL side that we have been covering now for 9 months leading up to this? This is our baby.
Yeah, I would say that there's a balance in the possession that I'm looking for, and how can you, because you know Seattle's they're gonna fly at you. They're gonna want to be that counterattacking team. They're gonna want to be the team that kind of sucks you in defensively and then gets in behind you. And whether that's on the deck or that's balls being played out wide, that's where they want to penetrate. And I think for RSL, finding that unique balance of when we do win the ball, like if I'm a player and I'm looking collectively and we've won the ball, how can we play through the lines of immediate pressure? Because Seattle does a really good job of when they turn the ball over, they press, they compress really quickly. So if you can bypass that first line and then recognize, is it time to go or is it time to keep possession? Because we can all talk about the importance of the technical ability of the player with the ball at their feet, but I think what's even more important is the movement off the runners and off the shoulders and creating that extra 4 or 5 yards. And I think in a game like this, how can you kind of manage the fitness? Fitness is an issue, but how can you manage the fatigue over the course? Because I think fatigue is going to play a role for both of these teams, and that's why I think that the decisions with the starting 11 versus the substitution pattern, when and where, could be vitally important because it is such a condensed, closed turnaround time.
All right, well, the 2019 campaign continues for RSL when they head to Seattle to take on the Sounders in the Western Conference semifinals. That will be on Wednesday at 8 p.m. You can watch on Fox Sports 1, but be sure to tune in and check out rsl.com for all the pregame and postgame coverage.